And I feel like as the books, it takes time. It's like a tree. It takes time for it to find its form. And I feel like season 3, we have found our form.
CEO entrepreneur, born in 1964, Jeffrey Bezos, CEO.
Fine. I'll do it myself.
And I mean it. Over the next, I assume, several months, Kayla and I are going to be working on a video that is going to summarize all 14 Wheel of Time books for you, treating it almost as an adaptation. What exactly does this mean? Well, it's not going to be as detailed as my Rhythm of War summary that ended up being several hours for one book, because that would make this video entirely impossible to consume. But if I treat it as an adaptation and take every major plot line and summarize each book in, let's say, half an hour, then I will have a single video that will serve fans in many different ways. And I just realized we're gonna need a bigger whiteboard. Also, I forgot the K here. And we're actually going to be starting with book 1, because they just changed too much for me to go from the start to the end of the series and it make any sense at all if I pick up with like book 3 or 4 and I wouldn't even know which one to do because they kind of stopped with both happening. There will be some analysis of what they changed, but I'm going to keep that to a minimum because as time goes on, I want this video to be able to stand as its own thing, divorced from the show, for people to come back to for several reasons. And if you'd like to see how it develops over time, you can just contribute $1 over at Patreon, and whenever we finish one of the books in this whole summary, we will be posting a video there for feedback from the audience and early looks. You can actually help influence our style, the number of skits, the pacing. This is going to be our most ambitious, refined project ever here on the channel. Kayla actually just finished writing her book, and so she has said that she's willing to make it her full-time job now that she's sent off query letters and is waiting to hear back from an agent to just help me edit and get this project done. Two minds coming together with the Horde to accomplish the largest summary on all of BookTube. I have not checked if that's true. I'm just assuming it is. I don't think anyone else has summarized 14 books in one video. It also means there might be a slight tick back in the number of videos you'll be getting here on the channel, but I will be sure to at least get you fantasy news every single week in the meantime. This is not just going to be for show fans who don't have the time to read all the books or maybe aren't necessarily voracious readers and want to figure out how the series ends, but it's also going to be for people who have read the series or are going through it, maybe took a break and need a refresher before they jump back into the next book. Something that people have been asking me to provide for the Wheel of Time for a long time, and I'm now going to do by separating each book in this video by chapters as you can on YouTube. This will be the ultimate kind of pit stop along the Watt journey so that you can come back and go, oh yeah, that's what happened so far. Let's continue on, because the number one reason I see people not finishing the Wheel of Time is just halfway through the series they took a break and they forgot too much. I'm hoping to stop that so that even more people will finish the Wheel of Time someday. So wish us luck. Throw us a buck if you want to support this wildly ambitious endeavor. And now, for the final time, let's go ahead and do a deep dive into the Wheel of Time show and talk about all the things that went wrong in this Autopsy. Wheel of Time Autopsy.
Scalpel.
Hair.
Sponge.
Hair.
Wait. He's convulsing. He's convulsing. We're gonna have to shock him.
Oh my God.
We're gonna have to
Oh
shock
my
him.
These are the results of 1,000 electric volts. A neck with bolts. Nurse, we're losing him. Check the pulse.
On January 15th of 1990, Robert Jordan released the first book in what would go on to be, in my opinion, America's greatest finished fantasy series. I would bother to name the number of authors who have cited it as an influence to their work in the modern era, but I think it would actually be shorter to list the ones who haven't. Just 4 years later, I would be born, and by the time I was 11, I was already reading The Wheel of Time. I was walking into Barnes & Noble with my mom. She told me to pick up a book, and I saw The Eye of the World with a blue color. At the time, blue was my favorite color, and so I picked it up and had no idea what I was getting myself into. I've a couple times in the channel said that I would make a video getting into why The Wheel of Time means as much to me as it does, but I'd have to get into some really personal stuff to not make that video kind of performative and fake. Because the truth is, I would read and reread The Wheel of Time whenever something traumatic or bad happened in my life. And enough of my private life has been shared on the internet without my consent recently. I don't really feel like putting more out there. But saying as much as I'm willing to say, I had a few people close to me growing up die, either from their own hand or not. And every single time that happened, I would reread The Wheel of Time, or anytime something else that just really upset me in a way that I would need to recover from. And I think if I count all the partial reads and full rereads of The Wheel of Time, I've read the series probably 8 or 9 times total. There was something about the way Robert Jordan built his worlds that was just so easy to escape into with my imagination as a kid, and I think even still as an adult. The man's attention to detail and world building is rarely matched within the fantasy space, if ever. And while yes, the main series is 14 full books, at no point does that world ever feel like it's not growing within them. And I still remember exactly where I was when I found out that Robert Jordan passed. I was sitting in my grandpa's basement because I was living with him at the time due to some family issues, and it hit me like a hammer blow to the gut.
I had not heard of Brandon until it was the week of my husband's death. A friend was visiting. She put in front of me a printout, and it was the eulogy for Robert Jordan that Brandon had posted on his website. Brandon's eulogy was really beautiful and very loving. And I thought, gosh, this guy, he knows what the series is all about. And I got on the phone, called Tom Doherty and said, send me one of Sanderson's books. Tom said, okay, I'll go for that. We'll go for Brandon. You made it clear that you would love to do this. And that was wonderful. That's what I needed to hear.
The next thing was for me to fly to Charleston. Harriet drives me to her house. You know, I'm fanboying all of this. And you said, do you want some dinner? And my response was, no, I want the ending. I want the ending, and I want to know who killed and you're like, oh, all right, well, here it is. And you handed me that and kind of waved me into the den, I guess it is, or the sitting room. Head over there, go ahead, go for it. And so I was over there poring over the materials, and I flipped right to the ending and read, because Robert Jordan had always said, I have the ending in mind. And all the readers, all the fans had known this, and we'd listened to interviews, and he'd been saying for years, he'd been saying, I know the ending, the last scene is in my head. And so I got to read that last scene before dinner. Then I retreated to my cave.
Yes, he did.
And crawled in.
And put up a do not disturb sign.
And wrote furiously for a number of months. The amount of material he left behind is what makes this book possible.
My friend Sarah, who was the only friend I ever had in high school that I had convinced to actually pick up The Wheel of Time, messaged me, and the article was from months ago, because this was 2007, well before the day and age where if something happens, everyone knows within the hour. And so I had to sit with the fact that, like, my favorite author of all time had passed. I'd never been able to meet him, and I thought that my favorite series would go unfinished. And then really quickly after that, I can't remember if it was announced around that time or if I just found another article, I heard that this, at the time, little-known author, Brandon Sanderson, would be taking over the series. And the amount of doubt and fan conspiracy that was swirling around why this guy was tapped was fascinating to see in real time. But the first book came out, The Gathering Storm, and
like, what if it turns out that it's actually good?
I don't think it's easy to overstate how lucky Wheel of Time fans got with Brandon Sanderson being found by Robert Jordan's widow. And it's a tragedy that Robert Jordan passed, no doubt, and obviously, in best case scenario, he would have finished the series. But it does feel like the second best person in the world to do it was somehow tapped. Not only has Brandon Sanderson gone on to be one of the most heralded authors of the modern age of fantasy, but he was simultaneously a gargantuan Wheel of Time fan whose style was massively influenced by Robert Jordan, and he hadn't blown up yet. He wasn't Brandon Sanderson of today while he was finding success. This guy was hungry and had so much to prove, and was well aware, if you see him interviewed and talked about the fact that if he fumbled this, it could be a massive blemish on his future potential as an author.
I'm telling you, don't this up.
So he gave it his absolute everything, and that shows. Yes, there are a few things that people say feel different once Brandon Sanderson took over, but man, I cannot think of a better author to have done it even all these years later with so many more names to pick from. It is a truly magical thing that happened so that we could still get an ending that feels true enough to what Robert Jordan would have wanted, and also introduced the wider fantasy world to the megastar that Brandon Sanderson became.
It is not uncommon for popular authors to inspire real devotion among their fans. But Brandon Sanderson may be taking that to a whole new level. He was already the best-selling writer of fantasy and science fiction novels, proudly displayed by these loyal readers. But he recently broke new ground with the news that he broke to fans and the way they broke the internet in return.
I accidentally wrote an extra novel, in secret. I might have gone a little overboard.
And in an ultimate plot twist,
Brandon stress wrote 5 new books.
He plans to publish and sell directly to his fans. He's already raised more than $30 million.
And so years go by and the Wheel of Time is actually finished. We all get to read the last battle and see how the great adventure of Rand al'Thor and everyone else from the Two Rivers actually ends. There is fist-pumping action, tears flowing, but we actually get a resolution. One that is widely talked about as one of the best endings to a fantasy series in the history of the genre, which is also rare for a series this long.
When I was a junior in college, I started a YouTube channel because I was a digital comms major, and for a class, we had to make online projects. But I found something that I was really passionate about, and that was sharing my love of fantasy series. Granted, I had not read a ton of them by this point, but I already knew I was absolutely head over heels in love with the genre. And I'm very thankful for the fact that my community here on the channel has continued to provide me with infinite stories to examine, get lost in, and enjoy, and I will be forever grateful for my Goblin Horde for that. But after graduating with a degree in digital communications, I ended up becoming a software engineer for a few years before my YouTube channel finally began to pay off, and it could become my full-time job. And I can actually attribute that as well to Brandon Sanderson. The interview I did with him, the first one, was my best performing video ever, and it kicked the analytics for my entire career into hyperspace. And a few months after that, I went full-time as a YouTuber. I was not only just getting my friends to read The Wheel of Time, but now I was able to get hundreds, if not thousands of nerds to go ahead and give Robert Jordan's epic, the story that had meant the most to me in my entire life, a shot. And I still can't put into words how that makes me feel. There's a type of imposter syndrome almost, where it's like, why do I have a right to push this series into so many people's hands when I've never even met the author?
But of the many conversations around the Wheel of Time that lasted beyond the series' end, of course you had a lot of people wondering when and how, if the show would be adapted. There was a pilot aired called Winter's Dragon that was produced by a company that many people accuse of squatting on the rights, and I've gone in depth here about how Robert Jordan did not even like IWAT, as they call themselves now. But in the aftermath of what is undoubtedly an ashcan pilot for The Wheel of Time, I think a lot of fans kind of gave up. Yes, Game of Thrones had been adapted and that was successful, but it was much lower fantasy and not nearly as long. All of that changed in October of 2018, when it was announced that Amazon, in partnership with Sony, were going to adapt The Wheel of Time.
I don't know about you, but I got a bad feeling about this.
And I knew from go, this was going to be incredibly difficult and face possibly insurmountable challenges. Because, well, we're in the wake of Game of Thrones, and no doubt, it finally felt possible to do fantasy epics justice on the screen. The A Song of Ice and Fire adaptation that was Game of Thrones still had to tone down some of the epic fantasy elements, and there were so much more in Robert Jordan's world that from go, I wasn't sure how they were going to handle the level of VFX and budget it would require to showcase so many of the crucial important moments from The Wheel of Time. And in addition to that, it sucked seeing my least favorite company, as my hatred has only grown further for them as I've seen what they've done to the publishing space as a whole, was such a major player in adapting The Wheel of Time.
Axe, mirrors, cards. I played my part brilliantly.
No one was to be harmed.
And then the craziest thing happened, where people involved in the development of the show actually started reaching out to me because I was, for some reason, seen as like a credible voice within The Wheel of Time. And before I knew what was going on, I was invited to a premiere in London. What? I am a nerd yelling at a camera in a room professionally who barely is qualified to do that. And suddenly I'm gonna be in a position where I'm not only interviewing the cast of this show, but I'll be interviewing an Oscar-nominated actress, Rosamund Pike. I cannot stress enough how insane that felt. And there was a part of me that just felt really guilty going, a mixture of, again, imposter syndrome and also just not loving this company. But after talking to some people close to me, essentially it came down to, look, the benefits and impact this will have on your life are monumental, and you not going will essentially do nothing. So absolutely enjoy this opportunity. And I did. I was flown out to a premiere. I do not remember much of it because the adrenaline was just at a 10. But we sit down in the theater and we watch the first 2 episodes, and I remember thinking, that's laying down a lot of groundwork. It feels really wrong, but they're having to massively condense. And then there are the 2 big clouds. They lost one of their main actors, requiring tremendous rewrites, plus the bonus.
In America yesterday, drastic measures were taken as 2 of the nation's biggest states joined a third in ordering all non-essential workers to stay home. Now, New York and California and Illinois are in lockdown mode.
I gave season 1 some slack, and maybe that was a bad thing in hindsight, but I still think the first season of the show is just mediocre to kind of bad. But then the most uncomfortable thing during this entire process finally happens to me. I'm sitting down to do like post-episode release interviews for Prime, and I'm told at the end of recording one of the episodes where I wasn't entirely positive, just blanketly to everyone involved with the panel, that I should be a team player. I'm a critic. I'm a barely qualified one, but I have my principles, damn it. And that was a big red flag. I decided at that point to never directly work with any studio or adaptation ever again, because in addition to being told that, the final edit that comes out in these episodes of what I'm saying is so cut down to what my actual thoughts were that I end up just feeling like I'm being misrepresented.
After looking into it, I truly believe that the Wheel of Time show might be one of the most cursed productions, certainly in the history of the streaming era, if not the history of television. And I know what you're thinking, don't worry, we'll get into the things that went wrong while filming season 1, that I feel terrible for the cast and crew that had to deal with what happened there. But let's focus on what seemed to be the approach to planning out this show from the beginning. I don't know for sure how far ahead seasons of The Wheel of Time were planned. And with those issues that came up we're going to talk about, I'm sure a lot of the planning before they went into season 1 ended up having to be scrapped. But it seems pretty obvious, especially seeing how much season 3 pivoted, that the Wheel of Time show was not given enough legwork up front to make this adaptation what it needed to be. Just looking at what happened when adapting Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, they spent years before any cameras began rolling on the actual shoot to make sure they were going to be able to actually bring as many of Tolkien's themes, ideas, and characters to life as vividly as possible. I would bet money, while The Wheel of Time, I'm sure, certainly did try and plan seasons ahead, they did not have from season 1 to whatever 8 and 9 was planned out completely. You can feel that watching it now, and it seems insane in hindsight to try and raw dog Robert Jordan's epic, treating it as a show more like Dexter, something you can just get 8 episodes planned out for, get through it, and then come back next year to take on another. As you're trying to shift and move books around, contain 100 different characters and a dozen different plot lines, that is a recipe for failure, and makes me a little bit surprised that season 3 managed to be the most solid yet, and could indicate that that writing strategy did change. Now, I could be looking at something that is the result of what happened to screw over season 1. But all right, let's talk about what happened with season 1. I'm running out of locations to film in my house, so we're in the basement now. And before we get into this, I'm not trying to say that if these issues hadn't happened, season 1 would have been magically great or even as good as season 3. If it hasn't become clear yet, this is an autopsy. This isn't a review. I don't, quite frankly, care what your opinions of the show are. I'm trying to tell the story leading up to, during, and after the Wheel of Time show. But it's not overstating it to say what happened to season 1 of Wheel of Time when it comes to producing a show is like biblically bad, let alone a massive fantasy epic show. Let's break it down. So, they are in the middle of shooting the first season of their incredibly expensive, multi-hundreds of millions of dollars TV show. And a little known thing called COVID-19 starts spreading across the world. So while they are trying to film outside with massive groups of people, the world shuts down and they need to start rewriting their script of a fantasy epic to limit how many people can be interacting at once on screen or be in even one location shooting at a time. Oh my God. And then to make things substantially worse, one of the 3 main actors, for a reason we do not know why, ends up having to leave the show. So imagine you've spent months on months of your life as a writer trying to adapt one of the most complex fantasy books ever into a season of television. Then in the middle of it, you're told that the worst pandemic of your life is happening. And in the middle of trying to do those rewrites, one of the main characters who you've built stories around, probably even tried to bring in some of the personality of like later books that fans know of this character and love, like to work on that and interact with other characters more earlier on to earn it. They're gone. And it's too late to recast, and he's not going to be able to shoot any more footage.
No! Well, then could we at least pull up here and get some dinner? Because I like to be wined and dined after I've been...
So he's just going to disappear in the middle of the season. Holy sh! That is, I mean it. I have never heard of a worse thing happening in terms of a 1-2 punch for the production of a show. That is biblically bad. Again, I'm not trying to say season 1 of Wheel of Time would have been perfect. There were baffling decisions made early on in the show, but I know for a fact things even earlier in the season had to be edited and changed due to the sudden pivot that happens around like mid to late mid of the first season. And then there are huge ramifications from a writing standpoint from there that bleed into the second season. Now, I'm less forgiving of the second season, despite liking it a little bit more than season 1, because it feels like they could have course corrected a little better. But especially on rewatch now, it does have some of the seeds in it of season 3's quality. But before we get into the actual story that was brought to us in that first season, I want to find common ground with Wheel of Time fans across the spectrum. Whether you loved all 3 seasons, which is absolutely valid, if you hated all 3, which I also can understand, if you're in the mixed middle between like myself, we all know that the problem is not the source material. If a perfect storm happened and you had the best writers who were given enough resources and plenty of time to plan out an adaptation for what, you could absolutely do it. But that wasn't the case. And at the end of this, I'm unfortunately going to have to get into how what we have here is kind of the worst possible case scenario for the Wheel of Time franchise going forward. And that's not to try and throw everyone involved in the production under the bus. I can't say what I know for sure because I don't want to get no one in trouble, but my God, when you have one studio, it's annoying. When you have two trying to work together, things can become insane. But that grace being given, there are decisions on display in the first 2 seasons that now are absolutely baffling. Maybe, possibly, they could have been justified or retconned in future seasons, as we already saw season 3 trying to do. But now, with the show ending exactly where it did, it leaves it in as bad as light as possible. Season 3 was good enough that I will be coming back to it for a long time just to rewatch and enjoy. That was genuinely, in my opinion, a good season of television. But where I personally put the most blame on why the Wheel of Time failed to garner a larger audience is with Amazon. Because you have to remember that the majority of people who show up to watch this show need to not be hardcore book fans for it to be a financial success. Now, you want to make those people happy so that they spread the word and gather you those fans, but they can't be the sole source you rely on to try and make your hundreds of $million investment pay off. And Amazon essentially abandoned Wheel of Time's marketing. Here's a true fact that is baffling. Not a single cast member to promote season 3 of The Wheel of Time went on a major television network to do an interview. And instead, they were relegated to podcasts and YouTube channels. That is a decision from a marketing level and kind of showed me early on they weren't believing much beyond season 3. You have Rosamund goddamn Pike, and you did not put her on Seth Meyers, Jimmy Kimmel, fucking anything to actually make more people aware of the fact that, hey, this show's returning and coming back. Have her make the case that, oh yeah, maybe there were some mixed reviews, but we found our stride. Not once. And while trailers were dropped on YouTube and I heard reports of them occasionally being seen elsewhere, Amazon and Sony seem to be pulling out their marketing budgets early. And what's crazy to me is the worst reviewed consistently and less popular Rings of Power has been renewed. And this is like a sneaky dagger that's working its way into the demise of Wadon Prime. Because I remember when the details around the deal with the Tolkien estate for Amazon to bring Rings of Power to life came about, and they seem to have tried to scrub this from the public, but it's still like all but confirmed heavy rumors out there that they're committed to a minimum of 5 seasons. They have invested way more into the Rings of Power, and now that they are sinking these insane budgets into 2 shows, one they can't seem to be able to pull out from, well, the other's going to end up on the chopping block. And then finally, Amazon and Sony themselves did essentially 0 favors behind the scenes, between seasons, to garner any public support, sympathy, or goodwill for either of these shows. And I'm not just talking about the fact that when I made the mistake of signing on to do these post-show interviews where they ended up editing me to not actually represent what I was saying some of the time, where I was also asked to, quote, be a team player, which I'm a critic. That's unethical as hell to say to me. Or even the fact that Hello Future Me, Tim, got an email essentially asking for positive coverage. Holy crap. And Amazon, one of the biggest distributors of goods in the world, never even managed to get merch together to properly start profiting off a show that was on its 3rd season after even more years of being out. We never saw Amazon implementing any of their tremendous reach within several industries to try and actually crank up the success of this show, which is even stranger because when this adaptation was first announced, they ended up screwing over a bunch of artists who are already licensed to make Wheel of Time content. Yeah, I still remember that happening, where people whose livelihood depended on making merch at conventions and things along those lines got boned because Prime wanted their rights. And now, Well, they didn't do anything with it and the show's done. But putting all of that aside, Amazon, who is by far more the face of the Wheel of Time show, was continuing to piss off not only book readers as a whole, but specifically fantasy fans between seasons, as they continued to devalue their own Kindle ebooks by implementing unfair, consumer-unfriendly practices. Also now handing over mass AI narration to publishers to eventually force all of us as audiobook consumers to be forced to listen to. But third, and probably most relevant, getting publicly called out by Brandon Sanderson for their terrible royalty deals on Audible. You know, the guy who helped finish writing The Wheel of Time, which of course you can't blame the Wheel of Time production for, but what one arm does is of course still going to end up affecting the other. I've heard of too big to fail, but this is seeming to verge into too big to succeed territory. But not all of the blame lies with the studios. Most of it, I'd argue, but not all of it. Because the conversation around Wheel of Time became so unpleasant to have, even for like casual fans online, due to the culture war bullshit that it got swept up in. And the crazy part of that, to me is at least, the Wheel of Time show wasn't woke. Not only did the show make up a female character to fridge in the first episode, but the final episode fulfilled the bury your gays trope. Which, no, I'm not trying to say the show is anti-woke. It was pretty good on a representation level. I swear to God, these people who throw woke around will see pandering, which I'd argue some of the stuff we did see in Wheel of Time was, and then be like, well, that's trying to be woke. Not understanding that like actual woke media is things like Everything Everywhere All at Once. The movie Alien and Aliens. The original Star Wars was about American imperialism. My God.
They're using asymmetric warfare against a highly organized empire. I think we call those guys terrorists today.
When I did it, they were Viet Cong.
Exactly. So were you thinking of that at the time? Yes. So it was a very anti-authoritarian, very kind of 60s against the man kind of thing, a fantasy.
Or a colonial, you know, we're fighting the largest empire in the world.
Right.
Pandering does not equal woke. And I don't think anyone loves pandering. I have no issue with the Wheel of Time show's representation, but there wasn't some super forced in political ideology either. Robert Jordan described his politics as being a libertarian monarchist. He also was quoted as saying this. So yeah, he deliberately put gay characters subtly in his books in ways he could, with things like Pillow Friends in the time he was being published before gay marriage was even legal. And I won't say he'd love the show. I wouldn't say he'd hate the show. I'm not going to try and put words in a dead man's mouth. That seems rather wrong to do, in my opinion. If you don't like the show, base it off the merits of why you don't like it. But please actually try and pin down for me, what was the woke ideology of the Wheel of Time show? In the books, Randall Thor actually ends up
establishing state-funded education.
We didn't get to that point in the show. I guess Robert Jordan's books were more woke than the show. Breaking news. And now, I'm very excited to bring you all a dramatic reading of a real comment someone paid cash money for me to read, to give you a solid example of one of hundreds of comments I would get every day in regards to this show from culture war obsessed freaks. From Crash Out Demon 69, I will give you, I do like your name. I love you, DG. I love your channel. I love how authentic you feel and sound. I love the respect and passion that you have for books. I love your content. I love not just the Wheel of Time videos, but also I love your other book series videos. But I hate Amazon, quote, Wheel of Time, close quote. 3 seasons was already too much. The most pathetic response, well, at least it'll get people to buy the books response. That dude is sadder than when the writer for Percy Jackson talked about his movies early 2000s and what Disney did to them. But at least he didn't have people like you to say that the movie abominations were still good. When have I said that the show is overall good? I have never. I've been positive on some episodes. I liked season 3 overall. What's that average out to? Mediocre. I swear to God, I feel so afraid of getting redundant when talking about AI or criticisms of certain stuff, but then mouth breathers like this come along and remind me, no, I need to say it louder because it doesn't get drilled home. Let me say this real slow, real loud. I absolutely hate Amazon as a company and what they're doing to the reading market. I reviewed the show in spite of their involvement. Overall, I thought it was average to mediocre with one good season. I do not think it was overall a good show and have not said that despite my individual episode analysis occasionally being positive. If you cannot distinguish between those things, I hope you go back to school and get greater education. Beyond that, yes, I am happy that people are picking up my favorite book series on a new higher scale than ever before, because unlike you, I'm not being performative and I genuinely enjoy people sharing in stories. So that eventually Percy Jackson also got to have a television series that was way better because they actually follow the book closer. But of course, when you're too busy getting invited into premieres and rubbing elbows with the cast and the Amazon fat cats, it's very easy for you, fair, honest, and non-biased integrity to go right out the window. That didn't roll down like it was supposed to. That was bad. That was just this goblin's opinion. What they are managing to accomplish is self-contained stories often within episodes that have interesting angles to them and within the bounds of that runtime are enjoyable enough, but it's the connective tissue from episode to episode where we're really starting to see the worst qualities of the show fall into the spotlight. I mean, the early episodes I just didn't like. No more land peeing on trees, more land being a mentor, please. Sanderson said in our live stream, and I agree with largely, and that is that the show is also on the broader season picture, really struggling with arcs. Some characters had arcs here, Egwene, but even the accomplished arcs of Egwene getting hardened, really like coming into her own and power, don't connect though to the season's theme, which it tried to then pivot and have at the end, and it's one of the big themes from Robert Jordan himself. One of the themes of the Wheel of Time is reliance on friends. Not to get into full book spoilers, but there is a very late series monologue about how important it is that this isn't just one person's story, it's a team's story. And so the show suddenly on top of this tower being like, oh, everyone's coming together, it's this big bad moment, they're all relying on each other, when Egwene just freed herself and got through all of this on her own, which she didn't in the books, feels a little self-contradictory within the narrative. So when Elaine and Nynaeve don't free Egwene like they do in the books, and they just manage to hobble up a high tower despite Elaine having just had an arrow in her knee, somehow having not run into Perrin, who just got there before them, meaning Elaine is a very, very quick wounded Hopper. Hey, Hopper, that's another thing we need to talk about. It just starts to feel clunky not only in the blocking of that scene, but in the messaging. Elaine and Nynaeve didn't conquer their hurdles or free Egwene because of working together. Perrin just kind of met some new people, watched a friend of his died, and then murdered an old man. And Matt's conflict was super self-contained and was all about how he really couldn't trust Min, the one friend he had made. Rand, on the other hand, I mean, I guess kind of learned to trust Moraine, but even then was pulled away from her and was working on his own, actually just with a Forsaken for quite a long time. So at the end of the season, having them all come together to defeat Ashamael, that needed to be so much more for this messaging of like friendship and like working together, having allies depending on one another to be the reason they took him down, which I would love that to be the reason that these 5 together are able to take Ashamael down. So it feels like they're so well set up to have Luz or Rand's current friends step in and prove Ashamael wrong. It's just that when they finally step in, instead of feeling like these really complex webs coming together that Robert Jordan so often landed in the series, we just have Perrin with a shield he got handed by a guy who died, and I guess we're just gonna assume the people who have not read the Becks have just no idea why Udo is currently in that horde or what that means. All right. Wow, she's really good at stopping the same 3 attacks again and again and again. But like Moraine and Lan, what was that? Like, Moraine at the early part of this season has this fight where she takes on a bunch of Myrddraal, and Lan helps her, and at the end, he's like, what are you hiding from me? But at the end of the season, what we learn she's hiding from him is basically a willingness to go further, like to kill a whole lot of people in service of Rand, which of course Lan has like no problem with. And I'm sorry, but that delivery of the line, like the only reason I was able to say we were not equals is because I think you're better than me. One, kind of goes against their relationship where both of them respect each other a whole lot, but as equals, which is again reaffirmed in the first season. They share butt water. Comes something that actually feels like it has a real momentum to it in the full runtime. And it's not just chop, 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 which is still unfortunately happening in that episode, with the glowing example being them fleeing from the Shan-Chan after Leandra knocked them out in the tunnels, and Egwene is just captured without explanation. Just as much explanation, actually, as Loyal getting the horn, which is just kind of casually said, like, someone from Kakari and a noble woman from Landfear helped them. Great. Apparently they just decided to nap there while on their vigil for Nynaeve. If you think that's fine, great. But her coming out this huge chunk of time later, in my opinion, requires them to at least pause all accepted tests and ask Nynaeve for days on end what the hell happened, how she managed to get out, and the ramifications for people who have probably been lost in there before and their potential still existence. Like, oh my god, dude, there should be like maybe a rescue missions to figure out what happened. Is there a way to reopen these? But nope. Just not gonna bring that up, which is something I even said that they were not gonna manage to do in that episode review. Called it. I tell you and anyone else who's reading this why there wasn't another season. It's because they wrote themselves into a bloody hole. They changed the characters to the point that there was no way that the show would have ended anywhere close to how the ending in the books were. All because they wanted to focus on female characters a lot more than they wanted to focus on Dragon Reborn. It's the Dragon Reborn. Simply because he was a male, to the point that there were no freaking way that they were going to make any seasons that show that he was actually going to be the one in charge and having all these other strong women answer to him and accept him as their leader. Do you think that's what happens in the Wheel of Time? Oh my god, dude. First of all, there is more time spent in female POVs in the books than male POVs. There are more female rulers in the books than male rulers. And well, Rant, I'm not going to get into spoilers, there are women who go against him the entire time. And he even ends up in relationships with women where they get to decide who he sees win. Where in the hell did Robert Jordan write this uber masculine 80s bullshit fantasy you're putting forward? My God. Amazon was so focused on making female characters as strong and powerful or evil but sympathetic victims. I'm also looking at you, Miss Two Plastic Surgery Cheekbones Red Sister. And as gay out of nowhere Miss Princess and Miss I Mean Two Men, so that makes me cool. As they wanted to be. The writers didn't care about the fact that the original writer of the books already made strong and powerful women. That was extremely important, not just to the story, but to the male characters as well, without having to glamorize and prop up female characters, especially at the price of watering down, dumbing down, and downright changing male characters' internal struggles and their importance within the series. I still love you, DG. Don't reproduce. But this show made my butthole itch. Oh god, I love when you see like one content creator say a thing and then their entire audience repeats it because, dude, oh my fucking god. This is what I have to deal with all the time. People pay, he paid me money to read that.
It's your moment. This is it, as big as you're gonna get, so enjoy it.
I don't believe they actually even read the books. I think they saw some grifter get mad about the show who also didn't read the books and then just regurgitated what they saw because they misrepresent the source material a lot, and the problems they have with the show I don't think really even exist. Again, this show fridged a female character they made up in the first episode and buried a gay in the final who did not die at that point in the series. What are you all talking about? They also disproportionately killed more black characters earlier in the series. Anyway, that was the most annoying part of all of this. But let's get into why the franchise is now in the worst position it could basically possibly be in. And what's extra nice is I'm actually going to take that money the guy paid and just donate it to the Trevor Project. Would you look at that? Look, we don't know which studio failed to come to an agreement for producing a 4th season of the Wheel of Time show. And with the upward trajectory of quality and where the show was heading, I'm genuinely really disappointed to see that. I think there was potential there, and especially with the cast that this show had, it really felt like they were managing to come into the characters. And there's even an interview on the Dusty Wheel with Josef Stradowski where he seems so passionate about realizing the future of Rand al'Thor and getting to all those different stages of Mad Rand. It just sucks that so much effort is going to evaporate now. And looking back on the 3 seasons that we do have, they look worse than ever. Even season 3 now just looks like lost potential. And the future from here, in my opinion, is looking pretty dark for the franchise of the Wheel of Time. I hope I am wrong, but with the video game rights being in the hands of iWatt, who have an ambitious, we're gonna make our own AAA Wheel of Time game claim, that's not the basket I'd put my eggs in for quality. And for any major studio that's considering a fantasy adaptation in the future, looking at Wheel of Time, they just see one of the richest studios in terms of resources that's able to adapt material failing with Watt, and that makes it less attractive. It's probably going to be a long time before any major player starts sniffing around Robert Jordan's IP again. There's currently a petition going around called Save Watt. Man, I hope their 1 in a million chance does pan out and they're able to get something there. You guys have my full support in terms of my heart, but my logical brain, I'm not really seeing that happen. Best case scenario, if the Cosmere gets adapted over the next 10 years and it's performing incredibly, that could potentially bring some renewed interest to everything Sanderson's name is attached to. And my best hope for that is we'd eventually get a Wheel of Time animated show. I actually think that would be a great direction to go in and distinguish itself without nearly as many limitations that live action kind of require. And as a fan of Brandon Sanderson, I'm really excited to see what is going to happen there in terms of what will be brought to life. I know I talk about adaptations too much, but it's a really exciting creative endeavor, and when done right, can really make some magic. But my final thoughts are, the Wheel of Time had the potential to stand alongside Game of Thrones, The Expanse, one of the true great adaptations of its era. Instead, we got the worst outcome, a slow burn into cancellation, but the story isn't dead. The books will live on forever. The books are bigger than the adaptation will be in 5-10 years. And the Wheel of Time is cemented as one of the great bridge series from classic fantasy to modern. It's not gonna go away. And I have seen that the community is still here, just as rabid as ever to talk about and share their love for the Wheel of Time. And that's why I am going to summarize it for everybody. I am going to make it so that if you need check-ins while you're going through, you can get refreshed. If you are a show lover who's just disappointed you're not going to know how the story ends, I got you. It's going to be a hell of a requirement, but I'm not going to step down. I'm going to do what it kind of feels like now that I'm taking it on, the channel's been heading towards for years now. I'm gonna tell you the story of the Wheel of Time. Like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here. And Jeff Bezos can suck my balls.